So what is perspective? Perspective is how we see depth in the world. Without it, it would be difficult to do many things like driving, playing sports, or even just walking around and not banging into things. The best way to start understanding perspective is to look at one-point perspective. One of the classic examples is to imagine standing on railroad tracks. You might notice that the two rails recede into the distance and seem to get closer and closer together as they get farther and farther away. This is called convergence. And it can be noticed in not just the rails, but the gravel, the fencing, and so on. Everything parallel to the railroad tracks is also converging as it recedes into the background. Where these lines seem to meet is a theoretical point called the vanishing point. When the objects are level with the ground, then you can usually assume that the vanishing point is on the horizon line. It's important to note that the horizon may not always be visible, but it doesn't mean it's not there. Here's another example. This is a photograph of Milano Centrale train station in Milan, Italy. It is one of the largest train stations in Europe. Notice once again that not only are the tracks converging, but so is the platform itself, the columns, the ceiling structure, and so on. Again, they all converge at a vanishing point which sits on a horizon line, which in this case is obscured by the station. This photograph also shows another important aspect of perspective called foreshortening. Notice how these columns get smaller and smaller as they get closer and closer to the vanishing point, but they still have the same proportions. This is how we as humans intuitively understand depth. We intuitively know that those columns closer to the vanishing point are farther away from us because they look smaller. It's worth noting that the spaces between the columns also get smaller and smaller. And this is not arbitrary at all. In fact, it's very mathematical, and you can use a neat trick to find those distances. If we assume that the distance between the first two columns is, say, 30 feet, and that all of the columns are 30 feet apart, then we can find out those distances in perspective with a simple geometric trick. Simply sketch lines extending through the tops and bottoms of the columns from the vanishing point. Then on the left edge of the first two columns, find the halfway point of the second column and sketch a dot, and then sketch a line through that halfway point from the top of the first column. Where that line ends up is where the left edge of the next column will be. This process can be repeated again and again to determine where all of the columns are. You know it works when you can do it on a photograph like this and confirm that it works. It is a very useful trick called plane extension, which you can use when drawing in perspective. Let's look at one more. Another classic example of one-point perspective is the city street. We have convergence in the sides of the street, the sidewalk, and the lane markers. We also have convergence in the tops and bottoms of buildings, and even the details of buildings like the windows. Everything that's parallel to the street will converge. From this, we can determine our vanishing point and horizon line, just as before. Now let's go over one more trick you can use when drawing in perspective. See this dude here waving? Probably hailing a cab or something. Maybe he's never heard of Uber. Anyway, let's assume he's 6 feet tall. If you were to sketch lines through his raised hand and the bottom of his feet, you could place another 6-foot tall person along the sidewalk by using those lines. For example, here's a guy that's closer, and here's a guy that's farther away. This is a useful way to foreshorten any object. Just be sure to keep the proportions the same. A great exercise for learning perspective is to draw a city street. When you do this, you want to take the reverse approach. You start with a horizon line, at a vanishing point, and then sketch lines converging from that vanishing point to literally construct the three-dimensional scene. You're basically creating the illusion of depth when you do a perspective drawing. Remember, everything parallel to the street will converge, and pretty much everything that's not will be a horizontal or vertical line. This makes one-point perspective drawings quite easy when you get the hang of them, especially if you stick to cube and cuboid forms, which most buildings fall under. As always, it's a great idea to draw construction lines first before committing to real line work, as you can fix any mistakes you make. It's also a great idea to block in the main objects before focusing on the details. This is true in any sketch. Otherwise, you can get lost in the details and may lose focus on the overall composition. You can use the plane extension trick for sidewalks and other aspects of the drawing. Once you start adding the details of the buildings, you can be creative with how you approach them. What kind of windows do they have? Are they glass buildings? Are they commercial buildings? Offices? Apartments? What is the building for? Does it have kind of a traditional architecture? Or does it have kind of more modern architecture? You can just have some fun with it. Remember that all of the details of the buildings will also converge, like the windows, the tops and bottoms of doors. Don't forget to throw some people in there to show scale and make your city look like the cool place to be. Be creative with it. Happy sketching!